On a special edition of KGW News, the escalating conflict in Iran, as President Trump speaks about putting boots on the ground.
I think we could do it later. We wouldn't do it now. Maybe we'd do it later.
Plus, how a new bill passed by Oregon lawmakers aims to protect those seeking safety.
It's so traumatizing to leave the abuse, to find a safe place, and then to have to relocate.
And later on, the message, or rather notes, that a group of protesters had for those operating the Portland ICE facility. Thanks so much for joining us on this special edition of KGW News. I'm John Adams. There are developments on multiple fronts related to Iran. A new supreme leader has been selected. New and escalating attacks are happening, and there is word of another American killed in the war. That's a 7th U.S. service member who's died. We have more from Matt Bradley in Tel Aviv.
Tonight, Israeli and American missile strikes lighting up the skies over Iran for a 9th straight day, as U.S. Central Command reports that another American soldier has died, raising the death toll among U.S. service members to 7. CENTCOM said the soldier died from wounds sustained during an Iranian attack on Saudi Arabia a week ago. An Iranian state media has officially announced its new leader, Mojtaba Khamenei, the son of the Iranian leader who was assassinated last week. The 56-year-old was widely expected to be chosen and is considered a hardliner. Today, Israel threatened to kill the new leader, and President Trump had insisted that he should be able to pick who's in charge of the country. An idea Iran's foreign minister rejected in an interview today with NBC's Kristen Welker.
Will Iran allow President Trump to have any role in picking its new leader?
We allow nobody to interfere in our domestic affairs. This is up to the Iranian people to elect their new leader.
It comes as there's a new focus for Israeli attacks: Iranian energy installations like this fuel depot and gas pipelines in the capital, Tehran. But Iran is still fighting back, saying today that it will expand its target list to include key assets and vital interests of the U.S. and Israel throughout the region, according to Iran's semi-official Fars news agency. U.S. Central Command warns civilians in Iran to avoid crowded areas. They say Iranian forces are using crowd cover to launch attack drones and ballistic missiles. The military offered no evidence to back up its claim. But even as the war widens, President Trump still isn't ruling out sending ground forces into Iran to secure enriched uranium.
Something we could do later. We wouldn't do it now. Maybe we'd do it later.
The president blaming Iran for strikes that killed more than 170 people at a school, even as the administration's own assessment points to American responsibility. Now, advocacy group Human Rights Watch is calling for a war crimes investigation. Here in Israel, authorities say Iran is increasingly using a troubling weapon. So see this little hole? That's where the cluster munition fell into this house. Now, no one was injured here, but police say that Iran is using these more and more. Cluster munitions that spread tiny bomblets throughout areas like this, a residential area. Israeli police say these weapons are proof Iran is deliberately targeting civilians.
Because when you're using something like this that spreads up to 80 submunitions, raining over residential communities, the facts on the ground speak for themselves.
That was Matt Bradley reporting. Oil prices rising higher today, an ongoing trend since the latest joint strikes on Iran began. Prices climbing past $100 a barrel for the first time since July of 2022. U.S. crude futures jumped nearly 20% to around $109 a barrel. Brent crude, that's the global benchmark, rose more than 15% to roughly $107. In a social media post, President Trump called the surging costs a, quote, very small price to pay. All right, time to switch gears and let's take a live look outside right now. The sun's setting after 7 p.m. today for the first time in 2026, but we could still be in for some chilly overnight temperatures in the week to come. Meteorologist Joe Ranieri joining us now with more on how we're going to start the work week. Hey, Joe.
Hey, good evening to you, John. We are going to be looking at some cold air moving through. Right now, we're sitting at a temperature of 48 degrees, relatively mild. Now, we're not looking at temperatures dropping below freezing, but right around the low to mid 30s for your overnight lows over the next couple of mornings. Weather headlines tonight: rain showers really start to increase after midnight. We saw a 3-4 hour stretch earlier today with some measurable amount of rain, especially along the east side of Multnomah County. Tomorrow morning, snow levels drop, and I should say tonight, snow levels drop down to 1,000 feet. No major issues here in the valley, but throughout parts of the Coast Range and the Oregon Cascades. That's where most of the accumulating snow is going to be here the next few days. And this week, we turn wet. Basically, from Wednesday and into Friday into next weekend, we'll have an atmospheric river pointed right at us that's going to be bringing in heavy rain and some wind. I'll talk more about that in a few minutes, but I want to talk about the Oregon Cascades right now. Outside looker from our Timberline Lodge camera with a temperature of 32 degrees. Snowfall, John, is going to be measured in feet. The snowpack, as we've been reporting on for months, has been relatively low and historically low. Well, anything is good, and well, 2 to 3 feet is really good. I'll talk more about that in just a few minutes.
We'll definitely take all the snow we can get. All right, Joe, thank you. New tonight out of Gresham, police have booked a driver whose blood alcohol level was more than 3 times the legal limit when he got into a crash. It happened around 3:30 this morning at the intersection of Southeast Division and 182nd. 3 cars were involved and multiple people were hurt. The impaired driver, Antonio Garcia, had the most severe injuries and was taken to a trauma center before being booked into jail. Women's advocates are rejoicing with the passage of a bill that protects the identities of tenants. This tenant confidentiality bill imposes penalties on landlords who disclose tenant information without their written consent. RJ Coulter has that story.
The bill had sweeping bipartisan support, and a women's services provider I spoke with says this is a win for safety for Oregon.
There's been a lot of celebration since the passage.
Melissa Earlbaum runs Clackamas Women's Services, which supports survivors of domestic and sexual violence, stalking, trafficking, and other crimes.
We know how important it is for survivors when they finally are able to leave a violent situation and get into a safe and secure housing situation, that they're able to keep that.
But Earlbaum says all too often, the woman's whereabouts get back to her abuser.
It's actually fairly common, and I think it's because information is just shared in a matter of conversation. Again, maybe very well-meaning, but that can create a really high-risk situation for survivors.
That information getting out can mean having to start the process of finding a safe place all over again.
In our housing program, we hear this quite often, where victims' information is shared and the abuser shows up at their place of employment or shows up even sometimes at that housing unit itself.
So this newly passed tenant confidentiality bill would fine the landlord or property owner an amount equal to twice the tenant's rent to be paid to the tenant. The property owner must have written consent to share the information. Exceptions include situations regarding legal or administrative proceedings, like a court order, background check, insurance claim, or maintenance services.
They create clarity for landlords. It's already a best practice, and many property owners are already training their landlords, their maintenance folks, their front desk people on how best to protect tenant confidentiality and privacy. But this law makes it really clear what those standards are and how to abide by them.
The bill now heads to Governor Tina Kotek's desk for signature. Back to you.
All right, Jake, thanks so much. Investigators in Kelso are getting close to finishing their investigation into the fire at the Red Lion Hotel. It says fire crews have been working since Saturday afternoon, putting out that massive fire that took over much of the building. This morning, work began to remove hazardous parts of the building, and remaining hot spots were put out. Where there was the front desk and ballroom areas of the hotel is now left with a pile of rubble. Firefighters left around 3 o'clock this afternoon. Protests of various sizes continue to be held outside the Portland ICE facility. That includes this one earlier today. Organizers called the Sound of Democracy Sing-Along Protest. Instead of the usual chants and costumes, these demonstrators had a curated list of 13 songs performed along the sidewalk outside the facility. The songs include America the Beautiful, This Little Light of Mine, as well as resistance songs from other countries.
I just feel like song and voice can sort of break through the static of polarization and all of the things that divide us, because I think we can all be united that like killing people for their First Amendment rights and locking up children is something we can probably all agree is something we don't want our government to do.
This is round 2 from a similar type of protest that was held in January, featuring a professional choir and band director alongside hundreds of others. In consumer news, nearly 75% of Oregon families are struggling to pay their bills. That's according to the state treasurer, who says even though incomes are rising, families are having trouble paying for food and housing. This year's Oregon Financial Wellness Scorecard, which surveyed more than 1,700 Oregonians, says more than 50% are struggling to pay their bills. Most concerning to the Treasury, a quarter of those surveyed have used payday loans and other expensive non-bank credit to get by through the end of the month.
We get it. We're not blaming anybody, but we are saying this is another sign that we have to help Oregonians build financial security.
Oregon Treasurer Elizabeth Steiner says it's concerning. Nearly half the people surveyed said they would not be able to afford a $500 emergency like a blown out tire.
If you're replacing one, you actually have to replace all four these days, and that is not cheap. If you don't replace your tires when they're blown out, how do you get to work, right? You don't get to work, you don't get a paycheck. You don't get a paycheck, you can't pay the rent, and it kind of goes on from there.
Well, Steiner says the good news is more Oregonians appear to be saving for retirement and taking financial education classes. If you want to take a quiz to test your own financial wellness, Steiner recommends going to the website financiallyfitoregon.org.